Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think we had a few more people coming in, but I think we're mostly in the hall now. If anyone else arrives, they're welcome to join. I'm Fiona Harvey. I'm the environment correspondent for the Guardian newspaper, and I'm here to introduce our session this morning on valuing water better. So obviously this is a massively important issue, a very key issue around the world. We're seeing an awful lot of new stresses come onto water. Water use is increasing. We are now pumping water out of the ground at an unprecedented rate, at a rate at which it cannot be replenished. We are polluting water supplies all around the world. We've got problems in our rivers in many countries. Some rivers are effectively dead. We've got problems with our water tables and our watersheds. We've got problems with our water catchment areas. Deforestation, for instance, is a particular problem when it comes to water catchment areas. And we've seen that continue. As I say, we've got problems with pollution, but also with sanitation, because the flip side of water is, of course, sanitation, and we have billions of people in the world without access to adequate sanitation, and that's a major, major problem, a very big development issue, because it affects all other development issues. It affects health and education and the economy and pulling people out of poverty. Really, water is something that is so fundamental that it affects everything in our lives. It's hard to think of a more fundamental environmental issue. And of course, that's even without mentioning climate change, because one of the effects of climate change is that places that are already wet get wetter, so you get problems with flooding, and places that are already dry get drier, so you get problems with heat waves and with droughts and so on. You also get potentially fiercer storms as well, which again can cause a problem when you get a lot of rainfall in a short period. We've had research showing that that the Indian monsoon, for instance, may be under threat from climate change. So it's a very worrying picture. And, you know, it's something that we need to get to grips with urgently, because we are sleepwalking into a disaster when it comes to what we do with our water. People take it for granted because it falls out of the sky, but unfortunately, we can no longer afford to take it for granted. So the question is, how do we value water better? And I've got a great panel here to answer that for you. And when we talk about valuing water, that's valuing it on several different levels. Valuing it personally, valuing it as a business, valuing it in monetary terms, putting a price on water, looking, for instance, at the public versus private provision of water supplies, particularly in urban areas. These are all important issues. Valuing water. At the moment, water costs more to a poor person in a developing country than it does to a rich person in a developed country. And, you know, that's not fair. So we're going to take in all of these issues of equity, issues of development, you know, issues of how practically to put value on water, and issues of the economy as well. So I hope that's set the scene for you for what we're going to try to achieve in this session. I'm just going to remind you about social media, okay? Because as you probably have seen in some of the other sessions, we're using this wonderful tool called Wisembly. And it's really easy to use. It's a really great way of participating, because it means that you in the hall can participate not necessarily just by sticking your hand up, but by kind of posting comments that I can then see and read out as appropriate in the session. And it's also really good for people outside the hall because they can interact with us all. So I would urge you to use it. Let me give you the instructions. First, connect to the OECD hotspot with your smartphone. When you're connected, go to the website app.ysembly.com and use the keyword OECD Pink to access the interactive platform. And when you've done that, I think you can probably do it on a tablet computer or something like that as well. I don't know what device you want to use. Probably might be some people here with an Apple Watch for all I know. And once you've done those little technical steps, then you can post messages and answer the polls. We will be doing a poll at one point in this session. You can also participate by Twitter, asking questions with hashtag OECD Pink, because we're in the pink amphitheatre, and your message will also be displayed. Finally, for those of you who have no smartphone, please ask your question by SMS. Should be flyers sitting around showing you how to do so and what the number is for SMS. And finally, later on in the session, we'll get a chance to do it also the old-fashioned way by sticking your hand up and asking a question. Okay, that's not very modern anymore, but you know. So that's the technical stuff out of the way, and I'd like to begin. I'd like to take each of our panelists in turn. I'll introduce each of them to you in turn, and I'd like to ask them a single question to begin with, which is, how do you value water? How do you go about? What does water mean to you essentially, and how do you value water? And I'll go first of all. Tatjana, I think I'll pick on you first. This is Tatjana Glad. She's the co-founder of Waterlution and the co-founder of the Impact Hub in Amsterdam. She's a social entrepreneur, I think we can say, a sustainability practitioner, and she's got a lot of you've got a lot of different experiences that's brought you to this in water. So give us an idea of how you value water.
Thanks. Maybe just a little bit more on the perspective I'm bringing today. I co-founded Waterlution 12 years ago, and so the role of Waterlution has been to design and convene multi-stakeholder learning experiences, and actually sometimes get out of the auditorium and really buy water, particularly around controversial issues, such as sometimes to do with fracking, oil sands, municipal water supplies, and such. And so the perspective I bring is in really looking for pattern making and pattern breaking change towards more inclusive, sustainable management of water. That's really the big aspiration we have, is what are the patterns that need to break and what are the new patterns we need to make so we engage in more sustainable behavior around our water. So it's really, for me, water, the opportunity for water is to connect the social innovation with the environmental innovation and the economic innovation piece. So the value for water for me is that it is in itself very inclusive. It brings people together. I mean, ultimately, any of us can talk about water. We're all qualified to talk about water. So for me, it is about bringing these perspectives together, particularly next generation water leaders. So the young professionals in NGO, in public service, in companies, as well as when we do our work largely in Canada, it's been bringing together Aboriginal young people, and as well as artists and more creative types to really imagine new scenarios for our future. And I think the other aspect of water is intrinsic in it is that it's a great storyteller. It flows everywhere, connects everything. So it really is the doorway to talk about water and agriculture, water and infrastructure, water and investment, and all the other issues we care about. And I find that water isn't actually an isolated topic, but the value for me is that it opens the door to almost any issue that you want to touch upon and make those interconnections. And so I'll be really bringing that to the conversation today.
That's very helpful. That's very good to hear that. And when we talk about valuing water better, what are the issues that spring to your mind on what we need to do? What do you see as the key problems here, and where do you think we will find solutions?
So one of the key challenges, I think, is where the conversations are happening. If you look at our society, there's many people who work in water-related aspects. And I think they're not necessarily involved in the meta conversations or the economic conversations around water. So for me, it's education and awareness of people in many walks of life. So I think that that's been a barrier, that the water conversation is left to experts or people who have been studying it for many years. And I think there's many people, farmers need to be involved in the conversation. So I think that's one of our challenges. I think the other is around innovation and entrepreneurship. What are the opportunities there to grow more entrepreneurial solutions for more inclusive water management, to use technology for shifting behavioral change, and also growing awareness, open data around water. So I think there are some opportunities there that would be great to touch on here. And I think the last one is getting the stakeholders together. So I think not necessarily by virtue of a panel here, but actually where the water issues are at source, getting them outdoors, and putting water at the center of the conversation again. And seeing those interconnections. We find that from our programs, and we've run thousands of programs over the last 7 years, is that when people remind themselves that they fall in love with water again, and they remind themselves that it's essential for life, that the innovation capacity of anybody, whether it's public sector, whether it's private sector, that just gets released in a whole new way.
Thank you very much. That's very useful. I think we'll be going into some of those issues that you've raised in a bit more depth in the course of the session. So thank you for that. Next, I'd like to introduce to you Henk Ovink, who is the Water Envoy from the Kingdom of the Netherlands. He is the Special Envoy on International Water Affairs and Ambassador for Water. Now, I don't know of anywhere else that has an ambassador for water, so perhaps you could give us a bit of an explanation of that and tell us what valuing water means to you.
Okay, first the ambassador part, and it builds pretty much on what Tatjana already talked about and what you started off, is that water is so key for anything that's happening in our world. And it's either the big connector, connecting economy and ecology and social issues, or the big divider. But we have a hard time grasping, and perhaps it's the big numbers that make it hard. 90% of all disasters worldwide are water related. It's 9-0. It's affecting 15% of local and regional GDPs.
Just to pick you up on that, can you, how are they water related?
It's either drought, disaster through drought, contamination, and that has two sides: ecological in the environment, or drinking water, or too much water because of flooding and sea level rise. And this, so this is just the percentage. If you look at the future, 2 to 4 billion people, which is 40% of the world's population towards 2080, will be affected by either too much, too little, or bad water. It's not for nothing that the World Economic Forum put water crisis as a #1 global risk. Now, when we all watch and witness Davos from multiple perspectives, but we haven't read about this water. It was not on the front pages of any newspaper that water was the #1 global risk. It really was about, and I don't want to underestimate the other report that was stressful and came out, was the Oxfam Nova report saying the gap between rich and poor is immense, and we focus on that because it's far more to the core, I guess, on what we talk about. Water is an abstract thing, but it impacts us all. And you see that impact when a disaster strikes, but then it's too late. So we have to get to a more preparedness mode. If we assess value of water, you could go two ways. You could say, what is the cost of a drop of water for mankind or businesses to operate, a human being or a business? But you could also value the cost of the impact of water, too much, too little, or bad. And recent research that was presented in the National Geographic of March, research from 2013 by Professor Hallengatte and her team, showed that in 2050, because of sea level rise and surges, the impact on our cities, urban cores around the world is increasing. Miami is leading that list. It's the new Atlantis, I sometimes say. With $278 billion at risk, and no prevention or protection scheme in place. The Netherlands is also on that list, number 9, with almost 100 billion at risk. But we have a, and then I get to how you deal with it and why there's an ambassador. But we have a long-term approach that's comprehensive, that has short-term actions that are grounded in innovation. We have institutional capacity going back all the ways to the 1100s, where our water democracy was formed. We have an inclusive process to enable the environment to engage, and a financial program that embraces both public and private finance. So that makes us a global leader, but we don't want to walk ahead. We want to engage with the rest of the world. So that's where the ambassador comes from, is the fact that the knowledge and expertise we have, it's not the idea to export our solutions, but to collaborate worldwide and build new coalitions for new solutions to address that issue of water. And that could be scarcity, safety, or polluted water, because they're always in the mix. So the last 2.5 years, I worked for the Obama administration in the region of New York in the rebuilding after Hurricane Sandy, exactly trying to, what Tatjana was touching about, how do you engage everybody? How do you create awareness? How do you ensure that a project intervention in Africa or Asia or New York or the Netherlands does not become a standalone intervention, and then, when all the attention is gone, there's no capacity amongst those communities, the businesses, nor the government, to stand strong and hold that long-term perspective that is so necessary to deal with this issue of water. So water is great. It's in my heart. I feel totally committed to deal with it, but it's also tough. And we have a hard time dealing with it. And we like to look also in Europe and say, in Bangladesh, and people are at a really hard place there. Myanmar, look at the small island states all over the world that are struggling. At the same time, in Germany, there was a flood in October that caused 7 billion euros of damage. 7 billion. That's not a small amount. And that in a situation where we actually think that we are ready. UK flooding, the same, flooding in Albania. And now the flooding in Texas and Colorado, next to the drought in California. So this issue with water is not a far away thing. It's at our doorstep all the time. We have to work on it every day in a row, but we will not see short-term results. We have to have a long breath, and therefore this institutional capacity to ensure that we get to that long-term approach is so necessary, because this is actually a cultural change, and it will take a generation.
Thank you very much for that. I think you've set that out very, very clearly, and certainly some facts in there that I didn't know. So that was very interesting. But just to pick you up on this question of the institutional issues, do we need a sort of a UN sort of water forum? What kind of international institution do you think could cope with this?
I grapple with this. This is something I struggle with, not only at night. What is the institutional capacity on a global scale? And I have a hard time focusing on scaling it up, because that most of the time will mean more conversations. I'm not saying that is not necessary. I'm also saying if that prevents us from action, then we're on the wrong track. So I'd rather focus on building a coalition in places and regions in the world that can become examples of how you do better and build off cases out of that. Because it will take a long term, we better start now. And I'm not saying we should not do that on a UN level. I really think we should. But it should not prevent us from acting now. This is something from acting now. We really have bottled water at the OECD Forum. There's I don't know how many thousands of bottles you've seen. They actually pour bottled waters in Nespresso machines, while we have great drinking water in our taps. So action now connected to a global conversation, of course, but yes, but a global conversation without action now is not a good idea. And as we both, or the three of us already say, We quote researchers and reports from all over the world. There's no excuse. We know the impact of water. Business community addressed it, saying water is the #1 global risk. We have no excuse. We have to act now.
Great. Thank you very much, and a very stark warning there. Thank you for that. That's great stuff from our first two panelists. I'm going to turn to my right now, and I'd like to. I'm going to ask the same question, which is, what does water mean to you, and what does valuing water mean to you? And I'm going to ask it this time of Pierre Victoria, who is the Director for Sustainable Development at Veolia Environnement. And you have a very strong role and expertise in this. So tell us your perspective, please, Pierre.
Thank you very much. And if your question is a personal question, what is the value for water? I would like to say that, firstly, that I'm coming from a part of France, Brittany, where the question of water is more sensitive than in other countries, because, of course, the population pay more attention to the problem, because we have a lot of pollution coming essentially from agriculture. So that is the first reason, because I am interested in water issues. The second is I am not engineer, I am from politics science, and I consider that water issue is very interesting on the political point of view, because we have, water management needs necessary to share and to discuss between all stakeholders, because it's a mutual organization. We are working at the watershed level. At watershed level, that means we are discussing about how we have, of course, to recognize that each territory and each users needs to have water, of course, for its own conception. But how do we share that? How do we share together, and so it's very interesting debate. And the third one is because it's a global issue, but the response, it's necessary at the local level. We are in the world where the globalization moves activities from one area to another area. It's not the same for the question of the services. Resources are local, services are local, and we have to find best solution and tailor-made solution to respond to the expectation and the demands of the population. My company, Veolia, of course, is working in this business for a very long time, from 1815. And we provide now in drinking water 100 million inhabitants all over the world, whatever is the level of development of these countries. And it's interesting to say that, because we are working in New York, we are working in Niger, which is one of the poorest countries in the world. And we provide 2 wastewater treatment for about 7.1 million inhabitants in 48 countries. So our point of view, and it is my point of view to discuss with you today, is what is a question all over the world, we can say. What is interesting in what you said before and in the background paper is to recognize that the water crisis is a reality, it's worsening, and it's not due to climate change. Because the climate change, of course, accelerates the problems of the water crisis. But the crisis is due to growing population, due to urbanization, and due to higher level standards of consumption of the population. And that means, too, for us, we are working in developing countries. When you have 1% population more in the city of southern countries, that means 2.5% less water available because of the added pollution. So we have really to struggle with this problem, and the question is how to do now, how to give essential services to pollution with less and less pressure on the natural resources. That is really, for me, the crucial point. It's a crucial point, and the answer depends on all the stakeholders involved in the water management. How to provide well-being to the population with less pressure on natural resources. And as you say, I am in charge of sustainable development in my company. Of course, we have to to give some answers, and we have answers to share with you about what to do to promote this situation and to deal with this very important issue.
That's really useful, yes. And of course, you know, you're going to be on the cutting edge of actually tackling this problem as a company. So it's really useful to have your perspective, and we're going to get some more of that shortly. So thank you very much for that. I'm just going to give you a little idea of what's happening on Twitter and Y-Assembly here. We've had a comment that the water conversation has been left to the experts, but it is a question for everyone. That's from Karen Castillo. That's a very good point, and hopefully, well, we're trying to be as inclusive as possible with you all in the hall and with all the people on Twitter and everywhere else. So it's a question for everyone. Everyone, you're welcome. Come on, come and join us. We've got, I'm just losing that. We've got another question here that someone is asking, what is the danger of fracking, really? And I suppose the question there is about, you know, the use of water in fracking, which obviously is a big issue. It's been become a very big issue, particularly in the United States. So, you know, that's something that our panelists might like to think about. That might we might bring that up again shortly. So it's great that people are really joining in over the internet. So keep it up. But before we take any more of that, I'm going to introduce our final panelist, who is Jack Moss. He's the chair of the Water Committee at the BIAC, and he might tell us a little bit more about that, because I'm going to ask him, how do you value water, and what does valuing water better mean to you?
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you for the comments from the preceding panelists, because they're all extremely interesting. Water is my life and is my passion in many ways, but perhaps I should explain first of all the multi-hats that I'm wearing today, because whilst I'm fronting BIAC, which is the Business and Industry Advisory Committee to the OECD, and it's a great pleasure for me to chair that water group. It is but one of the activities that I conduct in water. My day job is as the executive director of an organization called Aquafed, which is the International Federation of Private Water Operators. We represent private companies that deliver water and sanitation services to populations around the world under the instructions of public authorities. And our members extend from big companies like Veolia to very, very small companies working in difficult situations in places like Benin, Uganda, and so on. So that's what I do every day, is to try and look after their interests, try to understand how they interact with the public sector, and how we can improve those situations. But I've also am and have been for many years very active in the fields of water, reflections on water, and the rest of the business world. I'm an active member, and have been for many years, of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development's water projects, which I think I was probably the father of, really, and which has been very much contributing to the statistics that were mentioned by Henk just now about the rising understanding of the risks and opportunities provided by water to business. I started getting interested in water as a small boy when I studied geography, and I continued to be very interested in it when I went to university and studied geography, and learnt just how important water is in all dimensions of human life and in the environment, and it's been well expressed up till now. So one of the things I've been trying to do over the last 30 years that I've been in this business, having fallen in it by accident from construction and property development, is to get across, particularly to my colleagues in the business world, why water is important, what they can do to improve the situation, what they cannot do, where the limits are, where the strengths and weaknesses are. And that has led me to be involved in 2 very specific projects on valuing water. The first goes back to the work was done in 2001 and 02 and was published at the World Water Forum in Kyoto in 2003. And that culminated in a document that I can see one of the persons who worked with us on in the room. It was called Valuing Water for Better Governance. And that was a result of a complex multi-stakeholder exercise to try to bring different points of view together to understand why water valuation is difficult. The other one was a project done by the World Business Council, looking at this problem or challenge from more a business point of view. Neither of them have produced all the answers, but they have convinced me that valuing water properly, and I'd like to come back in some depth later on in this discussion to what I actually mean about that. But I see a real problem in today's world, and I have the privilege of circulating in pretty high political level at time to time. I've been discussing water and the Sustainable Development Goals with members of the UN and various states. And what one recognizes is that because water is everywhere, it's nowhere. Because it is undervalued, it gets no or very little political traction in many discussions. You ask most treasury ministers who control the money, what are they doing about water? They'll shrug their shoulders. They probably never heard of it. And yet, water is one of the 6 fundamental platforms of our existence, of our coexistence with the rest of our planet. If we don't look after water, we don't look after land, we don't look after air, those things are absolutely fundamental. We don't look after the energy that is linked to those. We don't look after the food that comes from the combination of water, air and land. We are not going to survive. If we don't look after the wastes created, and Fiona, I'm pleased you mentioned sanitation and wastewater at the beginning, it's a hugely important dimension of the water cycle. Bringing the return flow part of the water cycle into the picture is really important. And that's one of the successes so far of the negotiations on the Sustainable Development Goals, which maybe we'll come back to as well. It has got away from the taps and toilets view of the MDGs and got us back into integrating taps and toilets, which of course are essential, into the big water cycle, clean flows and the return flows, which have been forgotten in the past. So these are just some of the reasons why I'm passionate about water and why I think it's so important. And if I conclude by repeating something that I said at the World Water Forum only a few weeks ago, I'm currently rereading a book which I find absolutely passionate. It's called Collapse by Jared Diamond. And it's got some very interesting case studies indeed on historic collapses of societies in the past. And if you look at the preconditions of collapse, one is water, another is governance. In the past, those things happened at community or small civilization level. Today, exactly the same preconditions exist on a global level. And so, as Henk said, if we don't do something about it and do something about it fast, we're in deep SH1T. So we need to do something about it, and we need to do it about it now. And valuing, I think, is a key.
That's great. That was very forthright. Yeah, thank you very much indeed for that perspective. I think you've touched on a lot of issues there that we will be going into a bit more depth in as well, because I think I'd like to ask, following on from that, about the difficulties of valuing water and putting an economic value on water and how we do that, and whether that's actually possible, whether it's a good thing. So you can all be thinking about that while I ask a Wise Assembly question, because we'd like you to be involved as well. And so I've got a poll question, which I'm going to give you now, and you can answer it. as you wish, and I'll get the results shortly. Which do you consider a more pressing issue? Is it 1, climate change? Is it 2, water? So you can have a little think about that, and I'll get the results a bit later, and we can discuss them then. But in the meantime, I'll just... in the meantime, I'm going to carry on that debate about the economic value of water. How, at the moment, is water valued properly on an economic basis, and as the services that we get from water and so on? Henk, you talked about, the impact of disasters and some of the economic impacts of water. But when water's in a bottle like that, how much should it cost? What's the environmental cost there? When water comes out of our taps, are we pricing it correctly? Because some people say that the only way to use a resource efficiently is if it is correctly priced. Others disagree, and others say that, on natural resources, you shouldn't be thinking in those terms, in terms of just prices. So what's your view on this economic aspect of valuing water?
But the pricing of water is both economics as well as political. And then the question is on what scale do you want to perceive it? And also if you only look at it, water as a drinking source, or source for our businesses. For instance, in the Netherlands, 16% of the GDP depends totally on enough good water, which is different than clean water, but these are the DSMs and other businesses in our country, and this is no different than any other country that has businesses. Or do you look at water and the need in our ecology, in our environment? So those are already 3 totally different ways of looking at water and how you should price it. Second, they also bring in the matter of scale. River basins cross countries. They don't really care about political boundaries. The Mekong Delta, the Rhine in Europe, the Nile. So if you really think about water for agriculture, and you think about the Nile, pricing would actually at least happen on the level of 3 countries. So that's going to be an even more tougher debate. So governance comes into play when we talk about pricing of water, and a singular perspective on pricing of water will fail because it will drive away stakeholders that are actually necessary to get to that level of understanding. So it's a tough question in the sense that I don't have one answer. I do think, and we all know this from the research, and others in the panel already said that it's undervalued. So in the Netherlands again, 2.5 years ago, when I was Director General for Planning and Water Affairs, I struck a deal with our business community about pricing because they have a real interest in that they have enough good water. And we all also always look at the Netherlands as, well, that's the country with too much because 29% below sea level and another 30% flood prone. We actually have a lot of issues with not enough water or water that is not of the right quality. And if you look at the world, it's only enlarging. If this is the amount of water worldwide, then only this is usable for mankind and businesses. And of that, the majority is not going to cities. The majority is going to agriculture. And if we don't solve that issue, and their pricing comes in as well, then it's going to be tough. So I think pricing is a measure. For that to get to a business case, we need better instruments, and then you need better instruments on a regional scale when it comes to the environment and development and safeguarding, building resiliency. And you need better monitoring and better evaluation. So sometimes it's also the lack of transparency and accountability in the way how we value and price water, next to the complexity of that there are so many different perspectives on how you want to do that.
No, it's certainly a highly complex issue. Yes, that's definitely the case. And we've got, just to let you know, in the sort of Twitter sphere and the Wise Assembly, we're getting a lot of response on this issue of pricing for water. People are asking, is proper pricing of water the answer, for instance? So I'm going to put that question to you, Jack, actually. Can we price water effectively, and should we be doing so, and if so, how?
I think before...
sorry, just to be clear, I'm talking about price, not value.
Yes, I heard you carefully, and I wanted to highlight that point of this discussion. Why is pricing, valuing water difficult? And it is difficult. It's difficult for a number of reasons, and one is that in that discussion, people are muddling all the time those three words that we've just mentioned. What are we talking about? Value, tariff, charge, cost systems, or the costs themselves. People talk as if they're all the same thing, and they're not. And we have to understand what we mean by each of those words. It's even more complicated because we don't know what water we're talking about. We generalize all sorts of water, but Henk just listed water on a huge range of different scales geographically and for a whole sort of different uses. You can't possibly have a unique price for water for all those things. In practice, I think what we're talking about is pricing the services, the benefits or the disbenefits that water give to a particular stakeholder. That's actually what we should be trying to talk about. And we should be trying to separate those different functions to the respective person who's interested in. Well, that then results in too much segmentation, because my interest in water may be diametrically opposed to your interest in water, and therefore we've got to find a balance. Now, markets for most products will do that, but water isn't a product. So again, we're faced with the difficulty of how do we understand the difference between the cost, the way we recover those costs for whoever needs to have the cost recovered, and the value or disvalue that the water usage or the water service provides. And I'm convinced that clearly understanding those three different terms is very important. And one of the dimensions that I think we tend to miss is that the cost part is by and large the result of an economic industrial type activity. If you're going to change the value of water in a service you're going to provide, that's principally an industrial activity. But for most water services, not all, but for most of them, the systems of cost recovery are determined politically. So there's a logical separation already between an industrial activity that looks at cost and a political activity that kind of looks at equity and allocation and these complicated issues of governance. And then the appreciation of the value, what I call the value perception, how important is that water to the person you're asking to pay the price, is a different viewpoint again. It's an individual or a societal viewpoint. And so these three things fall into different areas of responsibility. And to have a cohesive, coherent pricing, costing, valuing system that people agree with, you've got to bring those three different perceptions together. And if I can just go on a little bit longer, why is that important? What I think we see in so many situations today is that because the middle part, the cost recovery, has been inadequate, we tend to have costs that are higher than they ought to be, which are not covered by the cost recovery system, which means the services aren't what they ought to be, which means that the people who should be appreciating value don't see the value because the service is not good enough. So we have to change that round somehow and get to a situation where the costs are compressed as much as they practically can be, where the cost recovery systems are adequate to cover those costs, and that can only really be done through a system of either tariffication, real prices, or taxation, or some combination of the two. And if those two are balanced so that the service is delivered correctly, then people will start to appreciate the value is valuable, the service is valuable, and there will be a virtuous circle rather than the vicious circle that so many situations are trapped in today. Sounds terribly complicated, and I guess it is, and that's one of the reasons why I keep trying to exhort my friends in the OECD to do some more work on this, because I think they're quite well equipped to think about the problem.
Okay.
Have I helped you?
OECD, I hope you're listening. Jack is calling on you to play a role in this. Which the
Not to
OECD?
say they haven't done.
Yeah, go on.
Not to say they haven't done a lot of work on that already, because they have, and they've made some terrific contributions, and that's also a platform which they can build. So I'm not knocking the OECD. I'm just encouraging them to go further.
No, that's great. No, nobody's knocking the OECD, but I think it's great that they should be encouraged to do more. It's great to have that enthusiasm. Pierre, I wanted you to come in there.
Yes, I agree, of course, with Jack. I think that it's absolutely necessary to recover the cost. And the cost is to manage water and sanitation services is very expensive, in fact, because we have to finance plants, we have to finance networks, and it costs a lot of money. That is true. If we don't maintain these networks in a good situation, it's a very, very big problem, because you waste a lot of water. You know that in a lot of countries, you have more than 50% of treated water that is lost because of a lack of maintenance. So it's very, because the best response is the first response to the problem of availability of water is to avoid the waste, and to avoid the waste in the public networks. So you have, but if you have to pay, doesn't mean that everybody has to pay the same thing. Of course, you have to pay. It depends on the political level, of course, to choose how to recover this cost. But if you want that the citizens pay, the consumers pays, you can select depending on the social level of the population, and it's very big response all over the world to have social tariffs for the population to give the water affordable. But of course, we have to focus. It's our point of view of the question of the financial of the connection in developing countries, because in a lot of countries you have social tariffs, but the people have not the money to connect to the public networks. So of course, because sometimes it's about 6 months of wages to finance the connection of your to the public network. So we consider that subsidies must focus today on the problem of the connection, essentially in developing countries.
No, that's a very good point, and I'm just Henk, I'll come to you in a moment, but Tatiana, I'd just like to bring you in this question of pricing, the pricing of water, because pricing is different from valuing, and pricing is a tool that can be used to value, to put an economic value on things. But we should remember as well what Oscar Wilde said, which is that a cynic is a person who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. So I think, would you like to just tell us about your perspective on pricing as opposed to valuing?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that it's a tool, and I think for me it's an indicator of our capacity to make collective decisions for the future. So when we face the kind of water stress that, for example, Sao Paulo is facing, what amount of money will it take to buy back an aquifer? What amount of money does it take to allow people to have access to water when you run into a social situation where it's only the people who have money who have water to fill up their swimming pools, and people who actually need it for their children don't get access to it because of their socioeconomic status. So I think for me, there's a lot of socioeconomic and political issues around this whole pricing conversation, but more as an indicator for the future than just about buying a commodity in the past. And I think, as Pierre said, I think there are some situations in developing countries where maybe we can't afford the large-scale infrastructure anymore. We need to look for innovative solutions. We need to draw on the energy of business innovation, of entrepreneurs. I know a lot of entrepreneurs testing systems that allow people access, but what they do is they keep the money in the country. So I think part of the pricing is when you charge for the water, where does the money go? Does it go back to help to increase the capacities of the system? Does it go back to increase livelihoods and local entrepreneurship and to help people take co-responsibility for their water? So for me, I think it's not just about the price, but it's about the economic system we build around it. And there's some interesting work that's come out of British Columbia around a small organization called Watershed Watch, which has been even questioning our market pricing of water and saying, what would we pay to keep water in the ground? What would we pay for the well-being of water? So when you're looking at pricing for the well-being of water, that's not just for our own leisure or our own, excitement. This is a really nice lake, but it's also for the well-being of the fish that are in that water that we need to eat. So I think, there's perhaps some innovations in pricing that we need to look at that help point us to the future.
Thank you very much. And this whole question of innovation in water is one that I would like to address with our panelists. But I'll just let you come in first of all. Henk, you wanted to respond.
What it builds on what Tatjana is saying is that a lot of people don't even have the infrastructure. So then it all of a sudden becomes a very mundane discussion we're having here. Let's price water because we have a tax system and business community has a position and we have infrastructure. Perhaps it's not maintained well, but let's maintain it better. Large parts of the world can't even think about it, and then water is as the core asset for life is far more expensive for them, poor people, than for rich. So before you know it, pricing widens the gap. Second, it does not take into account at all the environmental issues. This is only on the user being either an individual or a business. While the total environment is depending on water, energy production, etc. So I think we have to be careful that we think within this small realm of pricing, we can actually value water. I think pricing and valuing water, before you know it, become two different chapters that are not in the same book.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very forthright there. And we've got something coming through from the Twitter side on this, a question on whether developing countries that are rich in water have an opportunity to increase their wealth by selling water. Now, that brings in, I think, a very interesting question because, of course, one cannot really sell water. Water can't be transported, or safe, clean drinking water is hard to transport over very long distances. I mean, you're filling a tanker with water instead of oil and sending it halfway across the world doesn't really make that much sense. So it's hard to transport water across distances. But we do transport water across vast distances already in the form of virtual water. And virtual water is, of course, when you use water to create goods, such as, use it in agriculture, and then you grow a field of wheat and irrigate it, then you export the wheat. That's virtual water. Grow cotton, and it's exported, and you make a pair of jeans out of it, you sell them, you've exported the water effectively. And that's an issue for a lot of developing countries because they're using their water supplies for this, selling the goods, but the water that's trapped in these goods is not really being priced or valued. So that's a major issue. There's also when we come to the trade in water, there's been suggestions over having a sort of a cap and trade system in water the same way as you do in carbon and so on. So this question of can developing countries sell their water is a really good one. And I'll just add into that the question of land grabs, because what has happened is that some countries where they are under a great deal of water stress, such as China, such as some countries in the Middle East, what they have done is to buy up big tracts of land in other countries, a lot of it in Africa, for instance, and some in Asia. They've bought up big tracts of land, and in effect, they're getting the water benefits from that land because they can use that land for agriculture or whatever, or resources of whatever kind, and then repatriate that back to, well, usually China, effectively. So that's another way in which developing countries are, in effect, selling their water. But I don't know whether it's making them rich. So let me just invite our panelists to just have a word about that. We've got a question down here. Is it on this issue?
Well, I just would like something.
Could we have a microphone? Yeah.
So I don't know. It's your leadership, but I think there has to be some involvement from the audience, and I want to bring
we're having an involvement through the Twitter sphere. We'll have involvement with you as well. Don't worry, we will. I just want to ask this Twitter question, and then we'll move on. So don't worry, we're taking virtual questions at the moment, but we will take real ones from the hall too. So, who would like to take on this question of developing countries selling their water?
Very briefly, it's happening already. It's happening. Large bags of fresh water being pulled through the sea from north to south. All kinds of stuff is happening. All kinds of stuff is happening, black market. Farmers selling ponds because they can't afford to make money as farmers. So it's happening. So part of the reason we started Waterlution in Canada as a water-rich country is to make a statement about the responsibility of stewardship we have as a water-rich country. And there are many water-rich countries that are also poor economic countries. So when we look at ourselves as water-rich and start to understand we have a responsibility for stewardship, and like you said, what can we do to host the conversation with the rest of the world and help share? I think that that's a very different attitude. Water is demanding us to work together. It will, across borders and such like that. And I think that's the big challenge. So I have a lot more to say on water-rich countries, but I won't now.
Okay, no, that's very helpful. That's very good intervention. Jack,
if I could sort of bounce onto that question, you mentioned the word stewardship just now, which is a relatively new concept, water stewardship. It's been around, I suppose, for about 15 years now. And a lot of that came as a result of an interaction between a small number of NGOs and the business community that I have the privilege of working in. And quite a few years ago now, we did some work looking at how much water companies actually need for their activities. And one of the things that particularly struck me was that a very big multinational company thought it looked after water very carefully, and did a very careful analysis of its water use and discovered that the use that it thought it was important and where it would have an impact was actually only 3% of the impact of water on its total activity. The rest, most of it, was upstream in the procurement of raw materials, mostly from agriculture. But quite a lot of it was also downstream in that their consumers couldn't use their products unless they had water in their homes. You may be able to guess what kind of company we're talking about. So by looking at virtual water, by looking at water impacts, imprints, footprints, in the context of stewardship, these companies have radically changed their behavior and are still radically changing their behavior and trying to map out where the water is and where the water risks in their supply chain really lie. And it's fantastically interesting to look at the complexity of these sorts of things. In my particular sector, the water and supply situation, we have only fairly recently discovered that for every litre of water wasted from a network, we're also wasting a considerable amount of energy. But that energy requires water to generate it in the first place. So there are very complicated interactions that are extremely interesting, but we do need to understand them better to be able to manage them. Back to your point, Henk, about the need for better data and better measurement. Well, I may have got off the question a bit there, but...
Yeah, that's a good point. Pierre, did you want to...
I think the competition about water is increasing now, and especially between food and domestic and some other. I think I agree with Jack that water footprint is a very good tool to have a better, to be better aware what is the reality of the water today. In a cellular phone, you have 1,300 liters of water today to manufacture a cellular phone. But you can also improve the situation. You know, in China, in India, for the same amount of rice, China use half of water than India. That means that we have to improve the use of water for each product now, whether it's a food product or a manufactured product.
Thank you very much. That's a good point. Henk, you wanted to come in?
I think we also have to broaden the scope a little. Why did the World Economic Forum put water as the #1 global risk? By looking at the impact it has across the board. So it's not so much only the problem of water in itself, but the way it's impacting, the way our economies work, our communities actually can live, how cities are built. So if you take a more comprehensive look at water and connect scarcity, safety, and quality, when it comes to development, both on the economic as well as on the urban side, then all of a sudden you will find more ways to deliver that added value. So then it's not so much fixed on taxation of the usage of water, but it's far more about incorporating water in a more comprehensive approach. Now, this is tough, but still we have to do this. Urbanization is going on, and in 2050, it's not only 75% or 80% of the world living in cities, 50% will live in deltas, being very vulnerable. And not only vulnerable because of flooding, but also because of pollution and not enough water actually for drinking. So the need to widen the perspective and get to a comprehensive approach is clear. Then it's which is my point again. How do we connect that with the people? Get to an inclusive process. So you raise awareness not only amongst politicians and decision makers and policy makers, but actually on the people that vote for those politicians, that actually can have an impact in their community at the same time. The business community, to work together with government to get to a public-private scheme that also will bring in value towards finance, not so much only value towards the cultural question. So building institutional capacity next to a long-term comprehensive approach will actually address the value of water better. In that system, there is, of course, the question on how you finance it. But if you only focus on finance, you get all four of us actually said, you will get a fragmented approach that will, in the end, not deliver the result we all want.
Okay, a fragmented approach is not what we want, I think we can say. Thank you very much for that. Just a comment coming through on Twitter, which is that Eleanor is saying that we seem to be referring only to potable and fresh water, not to salt water, and brings up the issue of ocean health and the high seas. I think in this session we can't really get into the health of the oceans and the seas, I'm afraid. I think we've got to be talking about fresh water, otherwise it's going to be far too much. So we're going to stick to that. I'm going to get the results from the WSEMBLY poll in a minute, but I'm also going to open up, as the gentleman here has pointed out, open up to the audience in the hall so that you don't just have to put your questions electronically. So if you've got a question, stick your hand up and we'll come to you with the... Here we go, we've got two down here. I'll take both of these at once if you don't mind. Where's the microphone? Where's it gone? Oh, you've got it. There, you've got it. You go ahead.
I'm referring to Henk Ovink about that we have to act, and the discussions are very important. For myself, I'm a rabbi. I'm from the religious world. I was in Kyoto. I was almost the only one from the religious community, and there were the water days. And again, for the first time, I was able to bring some religious leaders, like the leader of the Muslim community in India, like the Hindu leader from India, in the discussions of water. And out of that, we established JIVA, which is Global Interfaith Wash Alliance. And it's so extremely important to bring the religious world, also because of the value and the sacredness of water, about hand washing, about the way the pollution of water, not the pollution of the waters. We were at the Ganges in November, and it was a major meeting of religious leaders in India. The difficulty is that we have to move to the schools, we have to move to the awareness, and we have to cooperate with the religious community. So now we established Jiva, and it's a very precious moment that you are all here, and that I hear so much knowledge and so much possibility. So I offer our ability to increase our involvement now. You know that there will be the Conference of Parliament of World Religions in October. We will start with hand washing. We will start to realize that we have this precious water which has to come. We have to have a toilet in every school, in every mosque. We have to have a toilet in every household with running water. You are right, it is about not only the toilet itself, but the waste and the danger to health. So everything is, and this is therefore, which I'm very happy that that you, Mr. Ovink, are representing a country in the world. Actually, there should be ambassadors everywhere. But in the same way, don't forget the enormous potential and resources of the leadership and the people in religious, spiritual communities. The teaching from Islam, from Quran and Hadith, the teaching in the Buddhist, in the Hindu, all concentrated water, but it hasn't brought an improvement. And so this is now, it's actually an appeal to use it and to come together and to cooperate. And cooperation means that almost 80% of the world population that has a link with spirituality, with the awareness that we don't possess the land and the water. We are just in time caretakers, and we have to bring it to our children and grandchildren. So an appeal is, help us to help ourselves.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rabbi, for that excellent intervention there, reminding us of the spiritual aspect of this, and indeed that I think all major world religions have water and the sacredness of water somewhere at their core. I can't think of any that don't anyway. So that was a great intervention there, and I think Henk would like to respond to you. Thank you, Rabbi.
I couldn't agree more, because it starts with collaboration. And in collaboration, it is really about an inclusive process. And when I started to work in the United States right after Hurricane Sandy hit the New York region, I found myself with the task to deliver a new perspective on building water safety for this region that is totally fragmented in politics, but where water hits all sides, poor or rich, Republican or Democrat, doesn't really matter. And in that sense, it's just an example of the rest of the world. So when we started the process to get to an innovative approach that could actually deliver the results, that could showcase that there is a way forward, embracing the issue of water, being clean water, safe water, and a water-safe place, we started off the ground. And we reached out to over 500 organizations with more than 5,000 people in a process to deliver innovative results that are now examples in being built. Amongst those 500 organizations were all religious groups, of course. Activist organizations like Occupy Sandy, Muslim groups, communities without a religious background within. And that mix and multitude of organizations actually helped us inform the ideas. So I saw a Twitter feed, and I think it was based on a comment you raised, is that, and I said it yesterday as well, we're all professionals. Actually, we're almost all professionals in this room. And we might disagree sometimes, but we might not disagree on the issues at stake. Businesses, government, and academic world have a fair understanding on what is at stake. But there is a disconnect in the world between professionals and people. And that is exactly what you offer us to help bridge that gap. And I think with the project Rebuild by Design I delivered in New York, we also tried our utmost best to get to an inclusive process. And if we would, scale that back to the rest of the world using that collaborative example, we will get to the bottom of the value of water. And because of that approach, also get to a mechanism of pricing. But we have to do it the other way around. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Tatjana, you'd like to come in this, because I know you're very interested in this issue of collaboration, multi-stakeholder partnerships.
Yeah, I just want to respond very practically and build on what you're saying. It's very important. The work that we've been doing, particularly in Canada, has involved First Nations people. And there is a very different conversation you have when people come from a different paradigm of the value of water. So what happens is you can have a conversation about paradigm when those paradigms are in the room. I find it a little bit harder in Europe, where we are our own indigenous people, and due to the scientific revolution, we've sometimes forgotten our indigenous nature and connection to water. So perhaps a spiritual conversation is bringing it back, and that engagement is super important. So we don't do a program without First Nations involvement and engagement, because it brings a different level of conversation about what is pricing. It's a completely different conversation. And it's very important to bring the next generation in, because they are coming from a naturally collaborative perspective, coming with a lot of a lack of hope in the world. There's not going to be enough water, there's not going to be enough, it's a really dismal scenario we're painting of the future, actually, when you get exposed to this information. But when they get connected and become friends in this work, which is really one of the outcomes of our work, they become friends, they become interconnected across value systems, and they're able to make decisions that include a multiplicity of perspectives. So thank you for bringing it up. It's critical to the work.
Thank you very much. And I think we had, yes, here, and I'll take you as well, sir. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Olivier Baumla. I'm co-chairing the OECD group on water ecosystem and biodiversity, incidentally. I wanted to come in this very fascinating discussion between amongst pricing, valuing, costing, and you indicated there were innovation in this debate. I just wanted to quote the ecosystem services approach, which is can be very useful. We used it on wetlands. You have the prevention cost. You have the case of New York, the Catskills. You know the cost it would cost the community to have a huge water supply treatment plant, and you know that you can avoid that cost, prevent the pollution in the catchment, and the cost was around $6 billion, and they did the prevention. It had social cost, because you had to stop all human activities in the catchment area, so big political debate. We did the same, Munich did the same, we did the same in some areas in France. So this approach exists, and you have also the crisis cost of you can test no water. It's very difficult to give a value to a stored cubic meter of good quality water. Very difficult. It's difficult for all natural resources, and it's not done usually to have a value of the. You take the air. We are not able to give any value to the air available. It's because it's plenty in quantity. But when you have a crisis and you have a sécheresse, how do you say that? a drought, you see the impact on the GDP. So I just wanted to quote these two examples. And when you have in the same group economists of ecosystems and economists of water, usually the biodiversity ecosystems envy the water economists, because they say, you have areas where you can see, you can sell, you can tariff, you can cost recover. For biodiversity, it's much more difficult usually.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that intervention there. That was some great examples that you're giving. And also you touched on the issue of innovation. And I think that's something that I'd like our panelists to address as well in a moment. Yes. I'm sorry, I can't hear you unless you speak into the microphone.
Sorry, I was asked to ask a question after, but since it's really complementary, I would just like to so that you can all address it at the same time. Well, my name is Arthur. I'm from São Paulo, so that's exactly what I would like to say. We've been talking about demand side of water, like price and how to affect demand, but we haven't addressed the supply side. And I'd like you to compare the payment system they did in New York that was succeeded, and why the initiative in São Paulo didn't succeed with environmental services paying around São Paulo city. Why didn't it work like New York and other successful experiences around the world?
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for that intervention as well. And we've got a lady in the middle there. If she could have a microphone, please.
Thank you. Just to build up on innovation, you all said that we need the three pillars of the triangle: the politics, the techniques, scientists, and the population. So I was wondering if you had some examples, models on how you bring those three together, like how in Veolia you have expertise in participatory processes as well as expertise in infrastructure. And when you start a multi-stakeholder process, how do you bring the expertise, the technical expertise, without being then with keeping a balance between what is brought by the population and what is brought by the experts, what is brought by the multinational, who pays what? Are there some financial innovative models on how to pay the infrastructure so that it keeps belonging to the people who are in charge of their own life and their own water and their own quality of life?
Thank you very much indeed for that question. And I'll put that to our panelists in a second. We've got one more question there.
Very briefly, what is done to reduce the leakage of water in the networks, which is around 20 to 50%, depending on the countries?
Sorry? The water in...
What is done to reduce the leakage of water, the losses of water in the networks, which is around 20 to 50%, depending on the countries?
Great, thank you very much. And with a final question up there, I think. Sir?
Yes, thank you. I'm from Australia, so we value water very highly. With the urbanisation, the whole hydraulic system of buildings is designed for a different water consumption volume, and the problem is that the supply of water to the building can be fine, but the incubation and the damage that happens from that incubation is delivering, for example, higher Legionella and higher total plate count and so on. So I think there's the need for innovation for urban design to cope with lower water consumption per head designs, and both technologically and from a hydraulic design point of view and educational point of view for the occupants.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Well, a strong theme emerging there from those questions is this issue of innovation. And I'm going to go to you, Pierre, first. We were asked specifically, had a specific question about examples of innovation. Would you like to give us any examples that spring to mind from your experience?
Yes, I think firstly, the questions is like a call for innovation, a lot of innovation in the water issue and to struggle against water crisis. My understanding is that maybe it's not so complicated to deal with this challenge that we have in mind, because I think that what is the good strategy to my mind? It is wasting less. It is polluting less, it is reuse more, and to give more value to the water. That is the good answer. But the question is how to implement that. I think that we have to implement that at the local level. It's very difficult, in fact. And that is a contradiction in our debate, because we have always, when we are discussing about water, we are discussing at this global level. It's normal because we have the right to water for everybody, and we have, as a previous speaker said, a very big problem today. It is sanitation. What is very interesting is what you say about sanitation too, and why I understood in the Korean forum 1 month ago. It's now we're not only discussing about sanitation or toilets in developing countries, but the discussion is a very global debate about a continuous process. That means that we're discussing about sanitation, we're discussing toilets, access to toilets for everybody as a dignity right. We are discussing about collection, because if you don't collect, you have problem of health, treatment, and recovery of water. And that means that now we are discussing about this continuous project. That means that because the innovation is coming very far to bring into providing some answer to the problem. The question of wastewater is very interesting, really very interesting, because I think that when the European Union decided in 1991 maybe to have to demand to each state members to have depollution system at the local levels to avoid pollutions, they have not foreseen what revolution was behind these decisions. Because now, when you discuss about waste treatment plant, you know that the waste treatment plant, firstly, they produce water for the agriculture, industrial, or domestic needs. You have some of them are energy producers rather than consumers, and some of them now can produce products, new products, through the sludge of the treatment plant. I have in my pocket, I think, but maybe I forget it. Yeah, that is this little cap. You know, this cap is made by the Brussels sanitation plants in Brussels from the sludge of the tree. That means that really technical is going very fast now, and we can understand that if we make the link between avoid wasting and new technology, we can, I think, bring some answer. But if we have an innovation point of view, you can't have only a technical point of view. That means that we have necessarily a systematic point of view about innovation. It was what it was said about the integrated of the nature and the relations with nature in the cost of water. You have social innovation, the access for everybody. You have contractual innovation. How can an operator want money not about the consumption, but about the economy he made in water, and so on. So you have this behavior. But if we make the choice and see all stakeholders agree with the idea that innovation can move the situation and be the good response to the water crisis, I think that we have in the hand the possibility to do it.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. That's a very cheering news on innovation there. Jack, would you like to come in at this point?
Yes, I would, because I think we sometimes get a bit hung up on the idea of innovation. My 30 years of experience has shown a constant change and constant improvement in the face of challenges. Technical innovation is happening at a terrific rate and faster than ever, because particularly we now have computer power that we didn't have before. Social innovation is happening very fast in response to what's going on in the real world. Where I see less innovation is actually in the political sphere. And coming back to the part of the center of this discussion, the conversion of value into pricing. I think we need a huge amount of innovation in thinking about what sort of new pricing systems are needed to respond to value drivers in the outside world. Let me just give you one quick example. Most pricing systems today are based around the volume of water sold because they were trying to encourage people to buy water. That is completely the opposite to what we need to do in a water-scarce world, where we should be trying to find ways of pricing them to stop using water. And there are hundreds of examples like that in what are you trying to achieve with a pricing system. And that is the sort of work that I think this institution could do a lot of work to help with.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Henk, your final words and answer to those questions?
I think innovation builds great into your question on collaboration, because there's a clear necessity. Because innovation is not only about the solutions we have to bring on the table, it's definitely about the process. We don't always have to start anew. The way in the Netherlands we started building with nature, came up with a zandmotor, which is a sand engine, that nature actually takes care of delivering safety to our coasts, just because we understand nature better and intervene in a different way. Room for the river, widening, giving the water more room, instead of building higher dikes and dams that have the idea of safety. And because of giving the water more room, also increase ecological capacity and better drinking water and better water for our industries. So it's not always, innovation not always comes with new ideas, but sometimes just go back to the quality of the places. But it demands an inclusive process. And both the approach in the Netherlands as in the US, as I did in Istanbul and in even in Sao Paulo, is it has to start with embracing all stakeholders. Inclusive process means that government cannot afford to say, let's think alone and then deliver a solution. Government actually should reach out and try to bridge that gap. But that starts with building a new relationship. In the New York region, I came across a distrust between government and society. So first of all, you had to create a safe place and a process a little out of the institutional world. And I think OECD type of organizations can really help with restoring the opportunity to deliver innovative processes that are not in the realm of negotiations, because innovation will fail in negotiations, always. Innovation can only work out of collaboration. So you have to create this safe place, an inclusive process, and then let the talent of the world meet the talent of those places, because everybody has the talent to be involved, but not everybody has the same knowledge. And then you'll get to solutions that actually can drive change. And then it really demands on the long breath, but we talked about it. Can we keep, let's not stick to short-term silver bullets, because they will not work. We need a multitude of approaches, a multitude of interventions that will build a collection of innovation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's a great last word from you. And our last word from Tatjana on this.
Yeah, so I would echo a lot of what Henk said, and I think I would just add that I was prompted by the word design from our friend from Australia, and so some of the work we've drawn on is in the water world that I've done is from the complexity expert Dave Snowden, and he differentiates between complicated and complex. So in a complicated world, we need an engineering mindset, and we need to design in a very different way than for complex systems, where there are emergent properties, which we're seeing more and more in all these water conversations. And so for that, we need to get the stakeholders together. And the way we do it, based on your question, is through participatory methodologies. So learning journeys, water innovation labs, and get the experts off the stage with people on the glacier, in front of the lake, at the water plant, and in conversation discovery together about how to create fit for future scenarios. And even in the act of creating those scenarios, you're building the capacities for people to take those skills into whatever their context is.
Thank you very much indeed for that very concise last word, Tatjana. That's great viewpoint from you. We're nearly at the end of the session, so what I'm going to do now is just get the results of that poll that we asked earlier. Which is a more pressing issue, climate change or water? Well, we are a bit of a self-selecting group in here, in that you have chosen to come to a session about water. So I'm not sure what would happen if we asked that question across the conference, or if we'd asked it yesterday in my climate change session. But still, the results are quite striking. 29% say climate change is the more pressing of those two issues, and 71% say water is a more pressing issue than climate change. So that's something for us all to think about, because we get an awful lot of conferences on climate change, but not so many on water. And we have an awful lot of attention at the international level on climate change and not so much on water. We have the UNFCCC and climate change, and a COP21 coming up later this year here in Paris. But when are we going to have a COP on water? I think that's an interesting question. Okay, thank you all very much for coming, and thank you to our panelists who have been fantastic. You've been really great. We've got a huge spread of opinion there, lots of different range of experience. Thank you to everyone who joined in on the Twitter sphere and online and through SMS and all the rest of it. I think we got most of your questions answered there. For you in the hall, I think we got your questions, most of them answered, so I'm glad about that. And most of all, thank you all for coming. Thank you.